today I'll be talking about initial access brokers. And thank you for spending the time to come to to this session. And before I do that, maybe I'll just throw in a couple words about myself. My name's Amit. I'm working for Cyberint for the past 6 years. And Cyberint, I don't really intend to talk about us so much, but we are a cybersecurity company that was founded in Israel. And basically it is a company that was founded by several people or army veterans that were serving in the Israeli military and doing all sorts of intelligence operations. And when they finished that chapter in their life, they thought what they could do in order to help organizations around the world with the expertise that they had. And so in the past 6 months, we were acquired by Check Point. So we're now a Check Point company. So you will see Check Point all over here. And the research here that we're doing, or what I will be talking about, is research that we have been fostering in Cyberint for the past couple of years with our knowledge and expertise. Okay, so this is basically the agenda, but what I do want us to do in the next maybe 45 minutes is to think like a hacker, right? To think like an attacker. We will see data, we will see real examples of intelligence that we have collected and analyzed, and what I want us to do is really to think about, to think the critical questions and why things are looking the way they are, and through this process we'll hopefully be able to learn about how these initial access brokers operate, what do they do, and how we can maybe better improve our resources against those people. So that's funny. I should be probably telling you or explaining to you what initial access brokers is using what you can see on the screen. But last night at August Hall, after a few drinks, I had an epiphany, and I realized I have a better analogy to describe what initial access brokers are. So let's just give it a try. So imagine you're living in this nice neighborhood, and you have this nice house with 2 stories, windows, whatever. And then there's this kid who one day just breaks into your house. And they're not making a mess. They're not, opening all your drawers, keeping having your living room all messed up. They're not doing that. They're being very secretive about it. They're maybe picking the lock and leaving the door open. They're opening the window a little bit and leaving that open. Maybe they do something to your security cameras. You come from home. So you come home from work. I don't know what. You don't notice a thing. You don't know that something's changed. You're living your life. They go and do that exact same thing to all the houses in the neighborhood. And then 1 week later, you all come back, you and your neighbors come back from work, and you see a mess in all the houses. So this is basically what initial access brokers are. This is a group of people that will use some sort of a mechanism in order to get into an organization, a network, something of that sort. They will retain that information, retain that knowledge, not just exploit it right away, and then they will go ahead and sell that information to another group or another set of people who can then take that information, take that initial access, and do something more extensive with it. So how do they operate, and how there are certain ways or certain methodologies that we see based off of our research to how these kids can obtain that access to your house. And some of them will be very common, such as exploiting vulnerabilities, and this is a very, very common technique for those attackers to do. So whether exploiting vulnerabilities on current technologies that you have in your perimeter, phishing, as weird as it may sound, in 2025, we still have a lot of people, a lot of employees that fall victim to phishing attacks, and so this still remains a very prominent method for those attackers to operate and get initial access. This obviously goes hand by hand with credentials, which is usually what those attackers are trying to obtain in those phishing attacks and so on. And then last but not least, we have, I wouldn't say it's new, but in terms of complication, and complexity maybe. That's the most interesting one. Threat actors would do what we call spraying. They will spray endpoints and try to infect them with certain strains of malware, which in turn, those malware can basically send information such as credentials or any other information stored on the endpoint, such as a laptop, to the CNC server of the attacker. Once that happens, obviously that bad actor will have information such as credentials that they can use as their initial access to the organization. So that's phase number one, or stage number one. They want to obtain the information. What are they going to do later? They will sell it. They will take that information, and we said they will not just leave a mess in your house. They will just take that information that they have. They will pass it on or sell it to someone that can then take that information and cause a greater harm, or someone who will pay for that information in order to execute a ransomware, for example. And where do they do this? They will sell the access in underground forums, such as dark web forums, and we'll see in our analysis and hopefully today a little bit about some examples about forums that we have been researching and focusing on throughout this topic. So this is one. Secondly, there are sometimes just hand-by-hand deals with the seller or the initial access broker and the person who they're selling it to. It could be a direct ransomware group, and we will see that, or it could be any other platform that is direct communication between the seller and the buyer at the end of the day. And obviously, there are also Telegram channels or clear web channels. So this is not only limited to deep and dark web. The methodologies or the ways that they can sell the access is not limited to the deep and dark web sources. We see the sources becoming more and more clear web like, such as Telegram or any other platforms. So this is just a scheme to show the concept of what an attack like this looks like. So we start off at the beginning, and there is this initial access broker. They obtain the access. They would sell it to sometime it would be like an intermediate in the middle, what we call a ransomware affiliate, and then that ransomware affiliate will use that information, will use that access, initial access, in order to sell it to a ransomware operator. At the end of the day, from start to finish, we have that bad boy picking the lock, and that next week we have a ransom note on all of our monitors when we wake up in the morning and go to work. Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about, this is the concept, this is the idea of initial access brokers. But where do these happen? Where do these transactions happen? Where do these initial access brokers actually sell that information? And so we've talked a little bit about this. There are, of course, Telegram channels and some direct communication channels. What I do want us to talk a little bit about today is some of the dark web forums that are giving a good basis for all these attackers, all these bad attackers to operate on. Some of them you can see here, and we will see through live examples that we have been investigating, how do these forums work. So for example, XSS, there's a lot of information here if you're interested. I'm not gonna go and bore you to death with all the micro details, but let's just keep in mind the important details. XSS, all these, or most of these channels, most of these dark web forums will be mainly and predominantly operated in Russian. So this is an example. This forum promotes and discuss malware, exploits of CVEs, 0 days, and would provide everything that you will want if you wanted to exploit an organization. Another one is Exploit.in. This is maybe the big brother of XSS. It was founded beforehand. They look relatively the same. You can see similar contents over there and similar actors operating both in this forum and in that forum. So in that sense, they're very much alike. Another example is Ramp.io, and another example is Breach Forums ST. Now, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that forum. What's interesting about this forum is that this is the only or one of the most unique ones that operates in English, which is a key differentiator between this one and all the other ones that I've just talked about or mentioned. And what are we? April 29th, 30th? this forum actually got ceased by the FBI 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, on April 17th. So we are currently monitoring to see when and how this forum will come back to life, in what shape or form, and what type of access or what type of content will be then presented in this forum once it comes back to life. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about some examples, some forums. We get the concept of what initial access brokers are. Let's maybe analyze a live example. And this is an example of how you would expect to see an access for sale in the dark web in one of the forums, right? So the post will look like this. It will have, of course, the scary avatar of the threat actor, and will have the access type, what the attacker is attempting to sell. Usually it would resolve or will correspond with a technology, some sort of an RDP, a VPN, a web portal. It would indicate what type of information is being sold. A very interesting or very important feature would also be the victim, or what's the victim associated with, what the industry is associated with. There are threat actors who are trying to target specific industries. So this will also be mentioned. Of course, the revenue, which will give you an indication of what the size of the company is, and so on and so forth. And all these details, what they try to tell us as a ransomware affiliate, as someone who's trying to buy that information, is what information am I getting? And these details are obviously important because you want to buy information that will serve the purpose that you are trying to fulfill. As a ransomware or as a hacker, you would want to target an organization based off of your motives. And we'll talk about that, what those motives could be. Again, these are just other examples of other key features within a post that could be interesting for you as a buyer of such initial access. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about statistics, and this is kind of the part where I will not ask you directly questions, but I will just ask questions, and you just keep those thoughts in your mind, and we will discuss or see where this leads us. So for example, you can see here the access price ranges. So you can see that for 2024 versus 2023, you can see that in 2024, obviously the average price for I would say cheaper access has been increasing, and let's just think or keep that thought in mind to why this is. So we can see that for 2024, we have a lot more cheaper accesses that are being offered for sale in comparison to other years. The top 3 access types are RDP. So RDP is the most common one that we've been seeing across the years, followed by VPN and shell. And if we're talking about the top security products, and this is not meaning to shame any security product here, but we can see Windows Defender here as number 1, and all these technologies here where threat actors will exploit vulnerabilities in these technologies in order to get initial access. So if we have to summarize this quickly, the various forums that I've just presented will take those initial access methodologies, whether this is exploitation of vulnerabilities, whether this is credentials that they obtain, whether this is phishing websites and whatnot, and they will promote them on these sources. You can see here the distribution of sources by kind of the magnitude or the percentage of access offered for sale in these forums. So XSS is really doing great with almost 40% of initial access being offered there, followed by breach forums and the other ones. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the kind of where those, or the forums, the sources or the platforms where these initial access are being offered for sale or promoted. Let's talk a little bit about the target analysis. So who are those targets of these initial access brokers predominantly? This might be a little small, but what is the number? So the leading country in terms of initial access is obviously the United States. We see, as we see in recent years or in past years, as in 2023 and 2022, and also going back in time, we see that the number one country that is being targeted is US-based entities. And this has also been the case, of course, for this year. You can see that the number for ransomware or for initial access broker selling has risen in 20%. And when we see those numbers, we also have to think why that is. So when you see those numbers, when you see that the number has risen in 90%, have a thought or just take a second to think why that is and keep that thought with you. Also, if we're talking about industries, who can see here, I know it's a little small, but what is the number one or what is the highest relative increase in terms of the industry? Right, the government, right? Someone said here government. So government we've been seeing that government entities have been experiencing a lot more of initial access brokers offering access for sale. And this is also a key indication to maybe something else that we need to think about when we're considering why this is happening. So here again, I would ask you why, and keep that thought. We will touch on that maybe towards the end. This is also interesting. There are a lot of numbers here, so we'll just kind of summarize the idea to you. When we're talking about the revenue of threat actors, or the revenue of the companies that the threat actors are targeting, it's very easy to think that hackers will target the bigger companies, right? The richest and the biggest, because if they're financially motivated, and this is maybe a hint, if they're financially motivated, they better off target, I don't know, Apple or any other conglomerate that they could get a lot of money from. We see in 2024 that there has been an increase of threat actors basically trying to target, or initial access brokers trying to target smaller companies. So this is also interesting because then we have to think, what is the motive behind that? So keep that thought as well. Okay, so I know I'm throwing a lot of statistics, but what I want to do now is just to kind of give you or talk a little bit about some examples that we have been analyzing in cyber or in our research and ongoing activities. So let's just look at one threat actor that has been very, very famous in the past, I'd say, 6 months. So I'm introducing Miyako, and this is just based off of a name, this is a name that apparently comes from Japan. We are not really sure what's the origin of that actor or where exactly they're coming from. We can only assume based on their activity. So we see connections to like Eastern countries and like Eastern cybersecurity forums. We're not quite sure about the motivation. Maybe we can, together with you here, decide what's the motivation of this threat actor. But we have been seeing over the past 6 months that they have been targeting quite extensively government entities in the United States. So the FBI, other bureaus, universities, and other government entities in this country. And just to give you a sense, right? So for example here, this threat actor is offering for sale access to the Air Force Base. And when you would think about that, or for the, what does it say over there? USA Manufacturing or FBI subdivision. So when you see those names, you would think that those DBs, or not DBs, but those initial access would be sold for millions and millions of dollars in Bitcoin. But actually, this person is offering it for sale for $300. So what do we understand from that? What we do understand is that if we have to title this, or we have to decide what is the motivation of this threat actor, maybe it is financially based, or maybe this threat actor does want to earn a little bit of money. But if they are selling initial access for organizations that have a lot of meaning in terms of government in such small prices, it is basically leading us to think that they are more ideologically inclined. So this basically puts them or pushes them into the group of nationwide or nation-sponsored groups that operate on behalf of nations against one another. Now, why this threat actor is interesting is because this person, or not person, group, actor, what they did is they have been operating alone for quite some time. We saw, and I think it was around October of 2024, so not very long ago, a post about created by this person or by this group offering for sale an initial access through an RCE vulnerability in big IP devices. This was sold in one of the forums and on XSS and some other forums by this threat actor. So when we see this, we follow those leads and we see what happens with them. And guess what? A couple days later, after that post, let me just see what time exactly. So it was October 24th that this post was published, and we found it. And in the 22nd of November, so about a month later, we were actually seeing that there was an attack against exactly that vulnerability on that infrastructure that has been offered for sale in here. So this person, this group, Miyako, has sold access that was later leveraged and used by another threat actor group or ransomware group that basically took that, leveraged that, and ransomed that target company using that initial access. So this gives you an indication, or just to, this gives you an idea of how those things work and how fast, once the initial access has been obtained, it is easy for a ransomware group to those attacks. Another example here would be Swisscorp. So we had another initial access broker, a very famous one called Radar, offering for sale initial access for a certain RDP in a Swiss corporation. Later, couple days later, I believe it was 2 weeks later, we were already able to see the ransom note on Swisscorp, and we were also able to track that exact ransom group that ransomed this organization. So it was Ransom Hub, and we can see that connection between the initial access brokers and the effect that it takes on selling that data, or selling that initial access. This is another example, and I would have skipped it, but I actually think this is interesting. So in this example, we saw an initial access broker selling access. And again, as we saw in the previous examples, we expected that maybe a couple days later, a couple weeks later, we will also see the ransom note, on the ransom site of the whatever group that took that information, leveraged it, and now ransomed the target company. And not only that, they actually, here in the post, they're not even offering for sale the initial access. They're already saying that they sold the initial access to someone for $70K US. So we really expected to see the results of that attack. And a couple days later, instead of seeing the results of that attack, we actually saw that that group has mentioned that they themselves attacked that organization that they, a couple days before, offered initial access for. So we're not quite sure what happened there, maybe a dispute between the ransom groups, or it could also be, and you can also create your own theories about it, that group or that initial access broker has actually retained some of the initial access or some aspects of the initial access that they were offering to have some leeway to exploit it and use it themselves. So we're not really sure, but this is just to give you an idea of how crazy this world is and how really there are no rules. Sometimes we think there's a pattern, and there comes someone or a group or an attacker that breaks this pattern. Okay, so we've gone through these examples. What do we have to remember? Or what's the most important things? Two of the first ones are IBMs, so I'm going to give them the credit, but they're very much right. So the average total cost of a data breach, this is the number here. It's not a number that I think anyone here wants to pay. So there's that. Secondly, in the United States, the average price is obviously higher, and it is 9 point whatever million. we have seen, based on off of our research, that the sector that has been the most targeted is the business services. So consultancy companies, IT services are a very hot target for these groups or for these attackers, initial access brokers, to offer initial access for, usually because they just have a lot of other companies that they are working with. So initially, if I'm an attacker and I want to have the greatest impact, I would look for a company that has a lot of affiliations to other companies, and that I, through my attack or through my initial access, could basically gain more either recognition, impact, or financial gain. So we have seen also a rise of almost 100% as you already saw in the statistics, between 2023 and 2024. So there's a constant rise in the amount of initial access brokers that are being offered for sale. The United States is still obviously the #1 top targeted country. And we can, of course, here talk a little bit about why that is. Obviously, there are a lot of companies here that have a lot of money. So this is, if we're talking about the financial motive, obviously with the changes that are happening now, the geopolitical changes that are happening, this also motivates threat actors to operate against certain areas in the world. And this whole thing, or the numbers here basically led to an increase of 11% in the total number of ransomware attacks over this year. So a little bit, maybe a blink into the future. What do we think that is going to happen? So I kind of hate that I have to say this, but were you really at RSA if you didn't say AI? So basically, AI is going to be a major player in those attacks going forward. We do experience a lot of difficulties foreseeing attacks and anticipating attacks, anticipating the way that those initial access brokers are behaving because of the AI capabilities. This lowers significantly the amount of resources and capabilities that a threat actor needs to have in order to execute those attacks. So this poses a lot of challenges, and this is here to stay. There are places and channels and platforms in the deep and dark web that you can literally pay money. You'll get a chatbot where you can request your own attack tool to be created. So this is also a very interesting topic that we are now looking into. Secondly, and this is maybe, in my opinion, the most interesting part of this whole research, is how the geopolitical situation is affecting the motivation of threat actors. All the statistics that we've spoken about, that I've just presented, and all the why questions are basically leading us to believe that when there is geopolitical instability, threat actors tend to favor their ideology over their financial motivation. So this is why we're seeing so many government entities being targeted in 2024. This is why we're seeing less or more smaller companies being targeted in 2024, because those threat actors tend to favor targeting companies or entities in a country that they are ideologically against. Social engineering is going to be at scale. So if you remember, one of the top methods is obviously phishing. And the phishing campaigns have been so crazy good that even the most experienced cybersecurity specialists would maybe have to think twice before they flag that thing or flag that campaign as phishing. An example was Bybit. There is, I don't know if any of the people here have heard about this, but Lazarus Group has created a very, very compelling and convincing phishing website or phishing campaign to lure Bybit Crypto, and Bybit is, I think, the second cryptocurrency trading company or platform after Binance, and they created this crazy phishing campaign, and that led to them basically being able to steal $2 billion from traders in Ethereum. So this is going to be at scale. This is also used alongside with AI capabilities. This allows threat actors to really get to extents or go to lengths that we didn't really expect in terms of the complexity and in terms of the ability to convince us, the users, at the end of the day, this is a genuine website. We also see, of course, a shift in the methods and in the channels that those threat actors are operating in. While the forums do remain a key platform or significant, they have a significant cut of the initial, or where the initial access brokers are operating in, we do see that they tend to favor nowadays private channels such as Telegram or other private channels that we are currently now trying to investigate. One of them is obviously Signal, which was in the news in the past couple months for various reasons. So this is also developing, and we are seeing and monitoring this shift from these forums to these private and personal channels. And then last but not least, and this is maybe the good part about this, I know this this lecture might be a little daunting because we're just presenting how bad and how shitty, excuse my French, the situation is, but the good thing that comes with it is that the authorities also develop. And this is maybe we need to have a pat on our shoulder, right? We do something right. We're not maybe the best. We take some time to evolve and obtain all the newest technologies and to use them, but also being a member of the ex-Israeli intelligence agencies, I can tell you that a lot of the agencies around the world are operating closely together in order to help us organizations fight against these guys. Again, maybe a good example was Breach Forums, which is one of the forums that I was presenting to you today, really literally got seized 2 weeks ago. So we are doing something right. Here you can see some examples of authorities taking down forums, taking down resources for initial access brokers. Whether this means that they will cease to exist, probably not, but we do understand that this is a war that we have to keep fighting. It's not going to go anywhere. And I guess this slide is here to give the people here a little hope that we are also doing something against it, and we are doing something right. So now what? And this is really going to be the summary of this all. So what do we need to do? So there are two main, I would say, categories or two main aspects of what we could do in order to better prepare for initial access broker attacks. And I say better prepare because literally we can't really avoid it. What we can try to prevent it, or to push the date to when this could happen to us. So this obviously starts from physical security, things that probably if you've been here at RSA, you've seen a lot of booths offering for sale. Offering for sale in that context kind of sounds weird because I've been using that for the initial access brokers, but promoting their solutions for physical security, whether this is to harden entries, to RDPs, VPNs, and whatnot. So this is also something, or a front that we need to foster and maintain at a good level. We at Cybrint, and this is the only part where I will present or talk a little bit about what we do, is we give you the insight into where those attackers are operating. So one thing that you could do is you could really choose a very, very big lock for your door to make it very hard for those threat actors to pick it or to break into your house. But another thing that you could do is to have some information about how those groups operate. What are they thinking? What is their next move? Not always we can anticipate it, but in very or in large amount of the cases, we are able to predict or to foresee what the next move of an attacker is going to be. So you can monitor dark web and access marketplaces in order to have some understanding of what is going to happen. And this obviously comes with not just to monitor their existence, but also to have someone who will give you an understanding of where the market is going, where someone who will predict this shift from financially motivated attackers to ideologically motivated attackers. So this all comes with this entire monitoring and understanding of these groups, how they operate, and the effect of the geopolitical situation on those attackers and on those the behaviors of those attackers. Okay, so I know there are some questions. I've been having some people coming over to our booth to ask questions, so I did want to leave some extra time for any questions that the crowd here has. I know that we have a couple more minutes, sorry. So if there are any questions, I would be happy to take them. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you could say an annual report.
Yeah, we do. Some of these reports are available in, well, now the Checkpoint website. And we work closely obviously with our research team and the Checkpoint research team to produce those reports annually, yes.
So the Telegram seems to be the default, de facto place for all these cyber criminals to communicate. Is there any action taken on the Telegram platform itself?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in a lot of the sources, and Telegram is a little bit deceiving because we can access it on our phones. So we tend to think that this is a ClearWeb source and this is a legitimate source. At the end of the day, this source is acting a little bit like a dark web forum, right? There are no rules. The Telegram would not support takedown requests, to take down information from the resource. And in that sense, they do operate a little bit like this, mafia that we see on the deep and dark web. We do have some ways and some help that we can offer customers when it comes to that. They wouldn't usually be the classic ways where you would do what we call a takedown for any other phishing website. It will be a little bit more complicated. So the answer is yes and no, really depending on the context and really depending on it's a case-by-case approach. Yes, go ahead.
In average, do we know how many times an access is sold?
How many times an access is sold? Well, I don't have the number in mind, but I'm thinking if we have the total number of access access points that have been sold in the past year. We can divide that by the number of days or minutes that we have in a year, and we will get a number. I don't have a number in mind, but we could do that analysis really quickly.
Do we know if some organizations are buying their own access?
Yeah, we do. Some of again, I don't want to talk about Cybrint, but one of the things that we do at Cybrint is to do exactly these operations. We would perform what we call a human operations. So our teams have entities that they maintain in the deep and dark web where they will do exactly that. So if you're an organization that says, hey, I have some information here offered for sale for me, maybe you would want to consider purchasing that in order to see where this information is coming from. Sometimes our instinct would say no, because then we're supporting kind of the activities of these threat actors. But if you're quick to buy it and purchase it in that window, you can save your own ass.
How do you know whether or not the access is legit? I mean, how much of it is a scammer scamming people? And I don't know how you would figure out what percentage are legit or not.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and you're right. There is a lot of deceit and fraud in the deep and dark web, and sometimes you don't. But with a proper understanding of the deep and dark web, you are able to create profiles for threat actors. So when we approach a threat actor, in the vast majority of the cases, we will have some information about it. The reputation of that threat actor, the amount of access that this person has sold over the past couple of years. This is the deep and dark web is a very clicky environment. People know each other and people interact with each other, so it's very easy sometimes to get a lot of information about some actor with a little bit of understanding of the deep and dark web. We don't know for sure, and it's hard to know, but if there is a reputable threat actor that is offering for sale, axis by axis, and we can see comments and we can see reviews and we can actually see the ransomware groups taking those axes that they offer and exploit them, this tells you something about their activity. Hope that answers your question. Yes?
So what's the time frame between when one of these initial access brokers sells off credentials and when you actually see the extra?
Yeah, so it could be days and it could be sometimes months. In the examples that I presented here today, it was, I believe, a month and 2 weeks in the second example. So it could be very, very quick. The time frame that it would take really depends on the complexity or how am I going to describe this? How much leeway is the initial access giving to the ransomware group on the one hand, and then on the other hand is how easy or how easy it is for the group to, within the network, perform either lateral movement or to perform any other actions until we see that ransomware note on their screen. So there are two factors here, and it could be days and it could be sometimes months. Obviously, in larger enterprises that have really, these security operations and have a good understanding of cybersecurity, it could sometimes be harder.
Maybe put another way, when these initial access brokers go and sell it off, how long does it stay for sale before somebody goes and snatches it?
Okay. I now understand your question. So now it also really depends, but we do not see, and I actually have an example here. Let me just show you something. So one of the examples that there it is. So you can see here two examples. The example on the left is an actual screenshot from our platform. And the reason I chose to present a screenshot from our platform is because that access was, once an access is being sold, in vast majority of the cases, it is redacted. It is just removed from the forum, or there's a notice that says the access has been purchased. So the reason that there is a screenshot from our platform that collects the information, not from the actual post, is because 10 minutes later, the post was already down. So we were not able to even show it to you. If you go into the forum and try to access it, you will not get anything. So usually it's very, very fast. Obviously, depending on the type of target, countries like the United States, several countries in the Middle East are very popular. So we've seen, for example, over the past year, I will say, initial access to a lot of government entities in Israel that have been sold very, very quickly. It usually goes out very, very quick. All right, anyone else? Yes.
Search options do threat actors have when they're looking for access?
You mean in the forums, for example, right? Yeah, so the forums will give you really good search options that you will be able to search by company, so by company size, by company geolocation. So it really gives the threat actors, or really anyone, you could also go into any one of these forums, by the way. It will give you a really good search mechanism, which is a little bit surprising because you would think that it could be, or it would be a little bit more complicated, but no, they actually invest a lot in their UI and their user experience. So it's really easy to search these websites and these forums for access. Yes?
So to have, it looks like it's reputation-based to sell. So if you're a law enforcement agency, you are not in the IAB space already. So you have to get in. To get in, you have to start small. And I would assume you would have to, maybe I shouldn't be asking this question, but you would almost have to start off by selling access of fake companies or of legitimate companies and kind of have
I get the question. I will, because I don't want NSA agents in my hotel room tomorrow morning, I will choose my next words very carefully. But your line of thought is, you're in the right direction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I will stop here. All right. So I'll go all the way to the end, and I will, oops. I guess thank you guys, but there was a